governments, distinguished heads of states, of course, dear partners and friends of the World Economic Forum, a very cordial welcome to the annual meeting 2022.
The Great Reset. What is the Great Reset? We keep hearing about it. We hear about it in the news. We hear about it when we turn on anything about the economy, read about it in the press. What is the World Economic Forum, and who is this guy, Klaus Schwab? Why is it that when he sets a conference high in the Alps, the leaders of the entire world go to visit him? Why?
Klaus Schwab is here. He is the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. The organization holds conferences with global leaders all over the world, including the closely watched gathering in Davos, Switzerland, each January. Schwab created the World Economic Forum, as it's referred to, in 1971 with the mission of improving the state of the world.
We have become the official international organization for public-private cooperation.
We have business, of course, as a very important audience, and we have politics. We have continuous partnerships with many governments around the world. And of course, we have NGOs, we have trade unions, we have all those different parts.
Media, of course.
Media, of course, and very important experts and scientists and academia.
I'm Jack Posobiec. Welcome to the Great Global Reset.
The pandemic has radically changed the world as we know it, and the actions we take today as we work to recover will define our generation. With everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before, ways that better address so many of the challenges we face. And that's why so many are calling for a great reset.
In 2020, Klaus Schwab released a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. In that book, which took place, it was written during the lockdowns, he actually praised the lockdowns. And he pointed out, well, there was a decrease in global emissions and there was a decrease in human activity. The lockdowns were proof of concept. They want to introduce lockdown mindset, not just in times of emergency, but they want there to be constant crisis. And they're going to use climate change, they have used climate change as part of this constant crisis. But think about it. During the COVID-19 pandemic, they got everything that the climate industry has been calling for, the climatologists have been calling for from day one. They got the shutdowns, they got the sustainability, they got the cars off the road, they got the people staying inside. And so they're looking at that as a test case that they want to replicate, not just from crisis to crisis, COVID-19, Omicron, Delta variant, monkeypox, no. It's not about moving from one to the other. It's about taking that as a test case and extending it for all of our lifestyles. They want the lockdowns to be closer to how we live every single day. They're putting you in Stockholm Syndrome across the entire West. And why? Why are they doing this? It's simple. Because they want to institute those lockdown policies forever.
People are over COVID. The problem is it's not done with us, but we're in danger of losing this moment for transformative change.
There will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future. I repeat, there will be no return to the old normal for the foreseeable future.
So we're here in Geneva, Switzerland. We're at the headquarters of the WHO itself. Dr. Tedros just reelected to another 5-year term. A surprise upset, of course, for Dr. Tedros, the guy who completely mismanaged the COVID-19 response, accepted and spread the lies of the CCP who refused to tell us about human-human transmission, who refused to tell us what was going on in the Wuhan lab, that refused to give us the full genome early on of COVID-19, and to this day refuses to tell us about the gain-of-function research that was being conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Holding each other back or shifting blame will only cause needless delay in response and distract us from the overall objective. Of particular importance is to fully leverage vaccines as a powerful weapon, ensure the equitable distribution, quicken vaccination, and close the global immunization gap.
Why is China allowed to continue to be a member of the WHO when it seems that all they're doing is lying, denying, and obfuscating the truth about COVID-19? And I'll tell you why. It's very simple. Because the CCP has control of this building. You see 194 flags there, but there's really only one that matters, and that's the flag of the People's Republic of China.
The Chinese government is to be congratulated for the extraordinary measures it has taken to contain the outbreak. In many ways, China is actually setting a new standard for outbreak.
So inside right now, the representatives of the 194 nations of the World Health Organization are meeting. They are discussing this new plan for a pandemic treaty which will give the power to declare lockdowns, to declare pandemics, to declare all of this to the WHO. They will be taking away from the sovereign power of the leaders of the nations of 194 countries and giving it to the people inside here and the people inside that headquarters just down the road.
The World Health Organization is being weaponized by the globalist elite to shut down not only our nation, but the world's economy. Nation after nation implementing shutdowns based on the fear instilled by the World Health Organization. This helps these institutions gain levels of power that they have never had before. As George Orwell once said, we know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. These international health regulations help break the world as we know it, and they only serve the goals of the World Economic Forum and its conductor, Klaus Schwab.
The 1970s saw intensified cooperation amongst leaders and significant personals from the countries of Europe, America, and Japan. This cooperation, instigated by David Rockefeller, an American banker, culminated into what was known as the Trilateral Commission, founded in 1973. The commission members included everyone from the United States Secretary of Defense to the CEOs of the largest media houses of the participating nations. An international relations textbook would define world order as the distribution of power among world powers. This redistribution of power would be inevitable with the current global scenario. The rise of artificial intelligence, China's economic growth, increasing decline of situations in the Middle East, global shift towards the right wing, and data scandals plunging us into cyber warfare brings us the need to evaluate a new world order.
In 1973, the Trilateral Commission was founded by David Rockefeller. He wanted to bring leaders in business from across the world together to start to solve the world's problems. And it was really the first rumblings of the World Economic Forum and what we see today. This partnership eventually allowed China to rise up because they brought China into global business. And now we are all aware of the collusion between the World Health Organization and Communist China, and even America's politicians and journalists.
So when you read Klaus Schwab's writing, he lays out that there are three objectives for the Great Reset. He says it's stakeholder capitalism, ESG, and then the fourth industrial revolution.
Political, economic, social, and ecological dimensions of every issue today are intertwined. We act all as stakeholders of larger communities, so that we serve not our only self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility.
Capitalism, as we know it, is dead. This obsession that we have had with maximizing profits for shareholders alone has led to incredible inequality and a planetary emergency, and we all owe a debt of gratitude to Klaus Schwab and his team.
Everything we've learned in our work has shown us that diverse voices lead to better results. And it's for these reasons that the forum talks about something called stakeholder capitalism.
So with stakeholder capitalism, this idea that the global supply chain will be instituted and that borders will fall, borders will be erased, culture will be erased, and that you just become a commodity. That's stakeholder capitalism. And of course they'll use language like saying it's it's for sustainability and it's for the environment and it's for equity and so it's for diversity and all these these different wonderful philosophical quasi-spiritual secularist terms, but at the end of the day that's really all it is. It's this idea that they are going to transform our economy but also transform our way of life. And so that gets you to ESG. So what's ESG? It breaks down just an acronym, environmental social governance. But the idea is they're now ranking companies and countries based on their adherence to stakeholder capitalism.
BlackRock believes that investments that consider E, S, and G metrics can help you pursue long-term success of your portfolio and contribute to a more sustainable world.
You can get more access to financialization through these firms, these money market firms, by having a higher ESG score.
Today we manage $8.5 trillion.
People realize that that's quite that countries do not have that.
No, but none of it is our money. Not a penny of it is our money.
So in this model, BlackRock becomes the operations arm of the Great Reset. And that's so every company out there in the world, if you want to up your stock price, if you want to up your ability to go to market, to get access to those pools of capital, you have to pass through this new gate. And you have to pass through this new gate of ESG, which means you have to structure your board, your employees, your workforce, your buildings, your chain completely to fit this model in order to gain access to more capital. Elon Musk even talked about this recently because he noted that Tesla was given a bad ESG score. And he pointed out, we're the green car company. That's all we do at Tesla is build green cars. We're the ones that are actually trying to move the ball forward in terms of this technology for the entire world. And yet even Elon Musk is getting low ESG scores because they don't think that he's playing ball enough with ESG. That's how much control they have now. And by the way, for the countries, China, India, of course they're getting great scores. Why? Because they're still considered developing nations. And that's why the same environmental goals, the same climate goals, the same carbon goals don't get applied to them. And of course that's what they claim it is, but the entire thing at the end of the day is still a scam. The Biden White House, right behind me, this regime, their number one source of economic advisors is from BlackRock. Brian Deese, who is the head of Biden's National Economic Advisory Council, is directly from BlackRock. He was the head of their sustainable investment. They're coming directly into the governments of the world, whether it's here, whether it's Trudeau up in Canada, whether it's the Netherlands and the Dutch farmers. And so the question to all of you is, do we want to keep the government that we have, or do we want to go back to the government that we were promised? The government of three branches, not an unelected fourth branch that combines academia, the bureaucracy, the permanent state, and the financial enterprises of Wall Street. It's a simple question. I have to answer it.
The ESG philosophy claims that it wants to help the environment, but what they really mean by this is that they have the only solution to climate issues, and to them, the solution is for them to own everything, including private residences and agriculture.
Gary Berman is CEO of Tricon Residential, a Toronto-based company that has quietly become one of the largest owners of single-family homes in the United States.
So today, we own about 30,000 single-family rental homes across the U.S., largely in the Sun Belt, and we've got probably about 75,000 people living in our homes.
Tricon is trying to buy 800 houses a month, and there are companies even bigger. Some of the all-stars of finance, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Blackstone, have put hundreds of millions of dollars into these companies.
Tricon, a firm owned by Blackstone, is buying up homes in the United States and Canada. And what they're doing, and other similar corporations, is outbidding American and Canadian homeowners, forcing us to have to rent instead of own our own homes. Bill Gates, a famous advocate for the World Economic Forum's agenda and of sustainability, owns over 250,000 acres.
What's called artificial meat. And so you have people like Impossible or Beyond Meat, both of which I invested in.
You eat it as well, and you like it?
Absolutely.
You do. Okay.
You can go to Burger King and buy the Impossible Burger.
All right. Is it healthier for you, or just healthier for the atmosphere?
It's slightly healthier for you in terms of less cholesterol. It's, of course, dramatic reduction in methane emissions, animal cruelty, manure management, and the pressure that meat consumption puts on land use.
If you were starting from scratch, figuring out a way to deliver protein to human beings, you wouldn't use an animal. Science would tell you to do something different.
51% of climate change emissions can be attributed to livestock.
So we see a system like that and we say, this is just absurd. So how do you take a variety of plant-based components out there in the world, bring them together, and replicate this miracle of nature?
Bill Gates has bought in 18 states in America so far. And when you combine this with the purchases from the companies backed by BlackRock and Blackstone, you're able to see how easy it is for elites to outbid Americans and cause a surge in prices across the country. That rising cost makes it nearly impossible for first-time buyers.
Holland is pretty crowded. Our land is quite expensive. Labor is expensive. So we have to be as efficient as possible. We have to be more efficient than others to compete. And that competition drives innovation and technology.
Dutch farmers have been protesting for weeks, incensed by new environmental targets set by their government. They're vehemently opposing the measures which aim to halve nitrogen emissions by 2030. The new policy could mean farms like this one will have to shut down, prompting many to take action.
So, Henry Kissinger once said that if you control the food, you control a nation. If you control the energy, you can control the region. And if you control the money, you control the world. We've been witnessing food shortages across the world because of failed leadership for the most part, because of bad politicians. We're also seeing energy shortages that are caused by the radical left's insane environmental policies. We wouldn't be facing these problems if it wasn't for their radical agendas. And then they claim the impact of their radical agenda is the reason why we need to give them more power. And now we're seeing the combination of international corporations, of business forces, financial institutions, working together to control the money spread around the world. And that's really the last thing, like Kissinger said, that is needed to have global control.
It's really the notion of digital technology pervasively impacting every walk of life in every vertical industry on all parts of the globe.
You can hack my body and my brain and my life, and you can understand me better than I understand myself. You can know my personality type, my political views, my sexual preferences, my mental weaknesses, my deepest fears and hopes. You know more about me than I know about myself. And you can do that not just to me, but to everyone.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, just as an example, it's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
So a lot of people these days that are into technology, they're thrilled to see that we're entering this fourth industrial revolution. But I swear, I feel chills down my spine when I see that the West is trying to adopt the practices of places like communist China, using technology to track every movement of people. And now we're even seeing these titans in the tech industry talk about being able to manipulate, not only guess, but to manipulate the thought and the choices that we are making in our own minds. And it's something that we're going to have to face as a generation of leaders.
You will own nothing, and you'll be happy. Whatever you want, you'll rent, and it'll be delivered by drone. The US won't be the world's leading superpower. A handful of countries will dominate. You won't die waiting for an organ donor. We won't transplant organs, we'll print new ones instead. You'll eat much less meat. An occasional treat, not a staple, for the good of the environment and our health.
People in their 20s and 30s today have less wealth than any other of the preceding generations in modern history. Understand, that hasn't been done by accident. That's been done by design. They want you preconditioned and completely and utterly demoralized.
What we are very proud of now, the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
They are out to gain control of all institutions in our nation and every other nation. It's important that we understand these connections. It's important that we understand the history, the decades leading up to the moment that we're in now. Private industries working in tandem with global political leaders. It's something we've never, ever seen before.
Government policies, corporate strategies. We know that all those challenges cannot be met by governments alone, by business alone, or by civil society alone. We need collaborative efforts. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the states of the world.
If you have total government control over industry, what is that? Well, that is the textbook definition of fascism. Seems like every day we hear about these new organizations of global stature, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and these powerful institutions of global influence somehow have power over us, over our lives, over our political leaders, over our media. They're making decisions for us and our families about how our futures will go, about how we can live our lives. How are we going to live in the future? Where will we live? Will we have villages? Will we have traditional agriculture? Or will we live in cubes? Will our children be able to get medicine that's decided on by their parents? Or will this be mandated by global treaties and global legal structures? What kind of world are we going into when we hear about this? Well, there's a name for all of it. It's a name that these people came up with themselves, people like Klaus Schwab and Dr. Tedros. It's called the Great Reset. And what we're looking at here, using COVID-19 as a catalyst, they seem to have turned this crisis into an opportunity, as we've seen them do so many times before, to take power on a transnational scale, striking down our borders, striking down our national sovereignty to give themselves more power, and all in the name of progress, all in the name of science, all in the name of keeping us safe. So we came here to Switzerland to find out the truth about what's going on. We wanted to look at this at two events that were being held concurrently, one in Davos and one in Geneva, the World Economic Forum Summit and the World Health Assembly, both being led behind closed doors, heavy security, as you'll see, and making decisions for billions of people without taking a single moment to ask them what they wanted for their future.
First, the war in Ukraine, the aggression on Ukraine. This war is really a turning point of history, and it will reshape our political and our economic landscape in the coming years.
So we've been here in Switzerland, famously neutral Switzerland. Neutral during World War I, neutral during World War II. It seems as though they have found a new allegiance. No, it's not wars that they're committing on their behalf, but what it is allegiance to these global superstructures, these global powers. The World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the Great Reset. This is where Switzerland, after all these years, is sending its allegiance. And as we found out, they are willing to uphold that allegiance even with the threat of martial force.
Switzerland has strongly condemned the war and adopted EU sanctions.
Switzerland's clear stance has surprised many. There were questions at home and abroad, questions as to how this could be compatible with our neutrality. There can be no neutral attitude towards the brutal violation of fundamental values, which are also our values.
Ukraine has one of the largest delegations here in Davos this year. And so you see Ukraine House, this is going to be one of the major centerpieces of the World Economic Forum agenda. They set up these houses, these side events to the actual forum so that when people can walk out, they can go and visit various countries. Typically every year, up until this year, they had something called Russia House. Now that's been done away with this year, and it's been replaced with Russia War Crimes House. And of course, it's not being run by Russia. You're not going to find any Russians here today. And it was announced this morning by the World Economic Forum president that they want to do a new Marshall Plan for Ukraine. So we had the 40 billion that was already signed, another 100 million that's going to be coming from the United States in terms of direct military assistance to Ukraine. Now with this is the centerpiece. They want a new Marshall Plan for the rebuilding of Ukraine. So essentially, obviously the conflict is still going on right now. So we don't know which territories will remain controlled by Kiev, which territories will eventually be lost to Russia and these breakaway regions. But what it does seem like is happening is that the West is clearly going to be paying a lot of money into Ukraine for this. This is part of the money laundering effort that goes in through all of these international conflicts. The International Monetary Forum, the World Bank, what they do is when they find instability in the world, they go in, they flood the area with cash, and then it's their friends, it's their contractors, it's their patrons who get the money. The people on the ground, yeah, maybe they get a cut, maybe they do get a little bit, but the vast bulk of the wealth goes to their patrons and to their oligarch friends. So Tanya just went over to see how to register for Ukraine House. So she's got the registration form right here, and look at this. In its 4th year, Ukraine House Davos is co-organized by the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation. Viktor Pinchuk was the Ukrainian oligarch that was the #1 donor to the Clinton Foundation. We're seeing all of these connections between the oligarchs on the ground, the funding. This connects directly to the same way that Hunter Biden was getting all of his money out of Burisma, and the oligarchs that were funding him. It wasn't because of his acumen for the Ukrainian energy market, it was because of money laundering. So we're here in Geneva, Switzerland, this massive conclave of globalism. This really is the birthplace of globalism. You have the Woodrow Wilson Palace is right here, Port Wilson, right there just behind me. Wilson was one of the original globalists and one of the originators of globalism, not only in practice through the first iteration of it called the League of Nations, but also in theory. He came up with the theory of an organic state or an organic government, a permanent state that would exist outside of governance. And we see this still today. The relationship between the Federal Reserve and these massive money management firms like BlackRock, like Blackstone, the global elite. The money printing comes from the Fed, it goes to the firms look out to see who's following their ESG scores, who's following the guidelines, and then they get propped up with the investment. An ESG is essentially a corporate social credit score, just like the social credit scores that we had in the CCP for the people of the People's Republic of China.
Leo Hu recently tried to book a flight. He was told he was banned from flying because he's on the list of untrustworthy people. Leo is a journalist who was ordered by a court to apologize for a series of tweets he wrote and was then told his apology was insincere.
This is a way for them to determine if your company is compliant with their far left-wing agenda and the overall goals and provisions and objectives, both medical and economic. This is what they want to institute.
If you could design the perfect coordinated response, what are the elements of it?
Well, every orchestra needs a conductor. And so our proposal was to have a Global Health Threats Council, not a novel thought, by the way.
And then we also need to make this a global infrastructure. You know, we now know that ultimately we're only as strong as the weakest among us, and so we need a global surveillance infrastructure.
Okay, so we're here in Geneva with Norbin Laden, independent researcher, journalist, activist. You've been outspoken about the origins of globalism, the dangers of globalism in these organizations. You're from Geneva, so of course the birthplace of this ideology, but I want to go back further because we're looking at the Great Reset now, but there was something you said recently about how the Great Reset is really the last stage in a much longer agenda.
I mean, you can trace back the origins as early as the 19th century, but it really took form in the current way that we see it being played out in the early 20th century, specifically during the Woodrow Wilson era, whereby you had the first emergence of the structure, namely the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, the first attempt to this supranational structure. The American people at the time were very wise to what was being played out, and that it was an attempt to erode the sovereignty of the United States in favor of this, as I just mentioned, supranational structure.
Right, and the U.S. never actually formally joined the League of Nations, even though, and going around here in Geneva, we've seen the Wilson Palace, we've seen Wilson Street, Wilson Port is just, Wilson's name is everywhere here.
Yes, he was actually approached, I mean, the League of Nations was very much a British effort, and they roped in President Wilson to be kind of the face or the spokesperson of the League of Nations. The history books clearly attribute the League of Nations as a Woodrow Wilson project, when in fact it was very much a globalist project, and the US was put forward as the lead, but it was already a purely globalist construct.
So the construct, and the way that I've looked at it as well, is, and Wilson wrote about this domestically when he was at Princeton, it was this idea of a social Darwinist kind of organic state that would exist outside the confines of law, outside the confines of elections. Checks and balances don't exist in this world. And then the League of Nations, later the United Nations, now we have the WEF, the WHO. Those are the superstructures that actually have power, not these national governments anymore. And it seems that they're eroding this power.
Absolutely. There was an entire movement in the first quarter of the 20th century, spearheaded by intellectuals at the time like Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays, you know, the whole manufacturing of consent crew.
And I found that ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets.
They truly believed in the technocratic class, that they were the ones that had the education, that had the knowledge, that had the legitimacy to decide for the rest of the people how the world should be governed, which is the exact antithesis of what the American founders sought to achieve for their country and for future generations.
You know, I've described the Great Reset very directly as an attempt to copy the CCP model of governance that you see out of Beijing, that I saw living in Shanghai and working in Shanghai, and then applying it to the West. And so this is where you get into these various forms of trickery, these various forms of being told, well, you know, this is for your safety, it's for your health, it's for trust networks, it's for global compliance, it really just makes everything better, it's efficiency, when really it's not for that, it's for total control.
COVID is the perfect example.
Well, COVID, it almost seems as though COVID was the catalyst.
Yes.
That enabled them to kick things into high gear. But at the same time, it was also a chance for so many people to wake up to what was happening, and this idea that these unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats were making decisions behind closed doors for everybody else, from things not only associated with where you can go and travel, but even how you're allowed to maintain the health of your own body.
Yes. There was, before COVID, for me, one turning point, a major turning point, a catalyst, which was President Trump's inaugural speech. And you had for decades the advancement of this agenda, of this new world order, and he called out all the people that were sitting behind them, all these congressmen, all these senators that had sold out the American population for so many years to this globalist ruling class.
So what about the average person, the average citizen? What can, you know, in the face of all this, in the face of such an agenda, what can the average person do in, you know, in their daily life or just in their regular space to be able to fight back against something like this?
The thing that I often say is that we are all watching what's going on in America and we are rooting for America and Americans. We know that the American people is completely separate from this ruling class and all the harm that they have done, not only in the US, but overseas. You are our best chance for all of us all over the world to reclaim our sovereignty, both nationally and individually.
And that was the final end of the Founding Fathers, because they realized towards the end of the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, it says that the final enshrinement of rights is not in the government. It resides with the American people themselves. So this exhibit is Meta, and what they have is a basic interactive experience where you get to experience the metaverse.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech, we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
Speaking, we're talking about improving biology and redesigning organisms for beneficial purposes. It's going to allow us to not just edit genomes, but also, and importantly, write a new code for life. We'll have write-level permissions. We already started to see some of that this year. COVID-19 vaccines, they make use of engineered code in the form of messenger RNA.
And of course, transhumanism is a key component of the Great Reset. This idea that we will be living in augmented realities, this idea of wearable cybernetic devices. As Yuval Harari calls it, humans are hackable animals. Because when the Great Reset hits, when Elysium is achieved, what essentially they'll have is a global paradise for themselves, but a complete and utter devastation for everybody else, economically, socially, and culturally. They want you to be a Russian serf. Because you can't afford to go anywhere, you can't afford to leave your home, you can't afford to take travel, you don't own anything because you haven't been able to generate any wealth. Well, don't worry, because now you've got the metaverse to go into, and you can spend all your time in there. They want you in here, in the box, with your eyes permanently glued to a screen.
Excuse me, can I ask you why you're detaining this journalist?
Can you put the phone away, please?
Can I ask you why you're detaining this journalist?
I don't answer your question.
Is it we're not able to report here?
Please put the phone away.
All right, guys, so Jack Posobiec is currently being detained, and I'm being told by these Swiss officials here that I'm not allowed to record and that I need to delete the footage that I just got. I would like to know why this journalist is being detained on public property.
What's detained? Can you explain
How come he's being surrounded right now? Is he allowed to leave the area? All right, Jack, so you said that you've been sitting here for about an hour. You're surrounded by what looks like Swiss police officers. What's going on?
So we got detained at the World Economic Forum by World Economic Forum police. What happened? We were filming a couple of stand-ups, working on the shot right at the entrance to the official Davos conference there. At one point, while we were filming, a plainclothes officer and his partner had come up to us and said, "Can I see your passports? Can I see your press credentials?" No big deal, right? Went back to filming some more. Then eventually we were taking a break. This is about an hour after the plainclothes guy came back, give or take. And suddenly, two paddy wagons of what we later found out were World Economic Forum police officers rolled up on us. These guys file out of there, MP5s at the ready, and one by one, they made every single member of the crew and myself go behind the tables, unpack all of our pockets, and be frisked. Now, eventually, a female detective came by. She was also plainclothes, and she was asking us, "I wanted to know what you're doing here." Explained. We're filming a documentary series. We're Turning Point USA. And at one point, they even asked to take some of the crew away to go to one of their cars to be able to view the footage with the camera. You start showing them footage, they see something they don't like, delete, gone, or they take your card. I texted my brother and my wife, told them what was going on, they hightail it over, and while my wife was coming over, she actually ran into Savannah Hernandez, independent journalist. So when she arrived, getting in the face of that detective, why are you doing this? Looks like you're detaining a journalist. And what she said was, the detective, there is a reason, but I can't tell you. I'm not going to tell you. She wouldn't even say why.
There is a reason because we have to have a reason to control a person.
What was the reason? What was he doing?
I don't have to tell you that. Why are you asking me that?
They went back to our van. They searched our entire van without a warrant. No Fourth Amendment because there's no Bill of Rights in Switzerland. Now look, I'm dressed like a reporter, talking into a camera. I think everybody knows exactly what I was doing out there. But they decided to make an example of us after they knew who we were. I can only surmise that they looked up what Turning Point USA is, who Jack Posobiec is, what we're all about, the mission that we're on to defend liberty and to defend freedom on the West, and the fact that that clashes with the WEF's agenda, the World Economic Forum agenda of the Great Global Reset. So we learned a lot here in Switzerland. We learned how the way they run Davos is as if it's a police state. There's no rights there. There's no freedoms. The US Constitution, as we've learned, is the bulwark against these global agendas. They want government coming in and these unelected bureaucrats using the ideas that were championed by Woodrow Wilson a century ago. We're now seeing the final stages of that plan, what they called an organic state, now an organic world state. The Great Reset is just another name for it. It's the most current name that they're using for this agenda that's been coming for a long time. No constitution, no elected leaders, local governments that are subservient to a higher government, meeting in places like Davos and Geneva. It doesn't have to be this way. If you want to take a stand against the World Economic Forum, the Global Pandemic Treaty, a stand for the sovereignty of not just the United States, but 194 nations against the World Health Organization, you need to do it right now because we are in the final stages of it. And that means that all of this, everything that we have, can be gone if we don't fight.